Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Salty, Lessons on Eating, Drinking, and Living from Revolutionary Women, by Alissa Wilkinson, narrated by Erin Deward. Invitation to the Feast. This book is a dinner party, and you are invited. Dinner parties are among life's greatest pretenses. Everybody has to eat dinner. When your host invites you, that's what structures the evening, the meal. But really, a dinner party is an excuse to create and deepen friendships, to form alliances, to encounter new ideas, to stretch yourself. It's an invitation to risk something, to put yourself out there just a little, with the comforting universal activity of eating dinner as an excuse and a task to accomplish. A dinner party creates a universe. This dinner party is not a very proper dinner party. We'll be using paper towels instead of cloth napkins, and you might have to drink wine from the wrong kind of glass. Some of the guests are probably going to arrive at the wrong time. There's a good chance at least one of the dishes won't match the others at all. No matter. This is a dinner party for people with more than simple social niceties on their minds. You may know some of the other guests. Others may be strangers. When you first arrive, please chat with them while you enjoy the appetizers, a salty, crisp martini perhaps, and some soft, crumbly blue cheese with peppery crackers on the side. You can break the ice with chatter about the weather or your work, but there are plenty of other things to discuss. Books, movies, ideas, travel. Even politics and religion aren't off the table as long as you don't assume too much about other people's sympathies and proclivities. We're here to make a community, not just pass the evening. When the food comes out, though, everyone's job is to dig in. Maybe you're eating a roast chicken, rubbed with salt and pepper and placed on top of a bed of potatoes that have turned buttery and soft, or a big pot of autumnal stew full of orange and red and brown vegetable chunks floating in a savory, tangy tomato broth, roughly torn pieces of bread and hunks of Gouda on the side. Or a spicy shrimp salad, creamy and delicious, with a delightful crunch thanks to astringent bits of celery served over leaves of lettuce. There may be pitchers of sparkling mineral water or tall bottles of dry white wine. When the entree is over, perhaps you eat slices of pound cake with strawberries and creme fraiche, or a peach cobbler with vanilla ice cream, with small glasses of port or cups of mint tea. Whatever the case, this is not the time to hew to rules and portion control. It's a feast. As much as you're able, treat it accordingly. The thing about dinner parties is that you never know who will be there. During pre-dinner chatter, you may realize that a couple of guests are opinionated, brash, a little intimidating. You might sit far away from them at dinner, but they're intriguing. When the pair walks out to the balcony for some air and a post-meal cigarette, you could gather up your courage and your cocktail and follow, wondering what they'll talk about. And out in the cold air, delight might spread from your toes to your heart. These are women with strong opinions, but also generous ones. They aren't arguing just for argument's sake. They have a passion for truth and for the ongoing work of community. They call you over, asking you what you think, finding out about your story. When the host calls you back in for a nightcap, you sit near them, listening, learning, realizing that there's something revolutionary happening here. Because it turns out the little world that's been created here at this dinner party is not just a place to eat dinner or make friends. It's not a place designed to make you admire someone's outfits or envy their real estate. It's a more dangerous space. A gathering where flinty iron strikes against iron, throwing sparks on your own mind. It's where what you thought you knew about the world gets prodded and pulled and stretched and even snapped. So, when it's all over, when you're pulling on coats and wrapping scarves around necks, if you've met someone at the table you'd like to talk to again, don't be shy. Ask them if you can get in touch and talk about the things that scared you, the causes you have in common, the work they do, and how you can be a part of it. The greatest pleasure for any host is when two strangers who met at the feast table become friends, fellow travelers, comrades in arms. In the Brooklyn Museum, not far from my dinner table, is the great feminist artist Judy Chicago's most well-known work, The Dinner Party, which was first exhibited in 1979. 3 tables are arranged like a triangle, with 13 ornate place settings on each table. Each setting is designed and designated for a great woman in history, from the ancient poet Sappho to St. Hildegard of Bingen to Mary Wollstonecraft, Emily Dickinson, and Georgia O'Keeffe. The table rests on a floor made of tiles on which are inscribed the names of 998 more women and, accidentally, 1 man. It turns out Cressula, the Greek sculptor, was actually a guy named Cresila. Chicago said the goal of the work was to end the ongoing cycle of omission in which women were written out of the historical record. Various criticisms have been and continue to be leveled at the work. That's what art is for, after all. But I love visiting the work, being challenged by its incredible richness and the legacy of each of the guests at Chicago's permanent party. I see the names and think about how much I have to learn from them, how much they have to teach me. I wish I had a seat at this party. Chicago might remind me that I do, if I want one. At first, when I started thinking about this book, I wanted to write about how to make a great party. But then I realized something. I was more interested in actually throwing a party, introducing people to women I think of as my friends, even though I've never met any of them, and even though some of them, to be perfectly honest, intimidate the hell out of me. Some of them died before I was born, others passed far more recently. My fantasy of friendship is entirely one-sided, and I find myself wondering if I would have passed muster with some of them. But writing the book felt like a challenge akin to a fantasy version of that old getting-to-know-you game. If you could have a dinner party with anyone, dead or alive, who would you choose? My answer is here in Salty, though I've cheated and picked 9 women instead of 1, and some of them would probably bring a guest, too. You may have met some of these women before through their books, art, food, and ideas. Or they may all be strangers to you. That's okay. That's the idea. That's why I've asked you here. I began this book just weeks after the COVID-19 pandemic caused much of the world to shut down. Staying home, with the act of gathering exactly the one thing we were told not to do, I began writing about feasting. One thing I learned during a time of isolation is precisely why I value gatherings so much, and I don't think I'm alone. My hope is that history will show we learned the value of breaking bread and living life alongside one another in this time. And I hope that as you listen to this, we're in better times. I've spent some time with each woman, interested especially in how their lives, work, and ideas tell us something about living a life of feasting. Some of them have a lot to say about eating and drinking. Others are experts on friendship, failure, and activism. They wrote novels, led organizations, fought for freedom, raised children, mentored others, paid close attention to the world. When faced with adversity, they refused to knuckle under. They made their mark, and most of all, they lived, refusing to simply sleepwalk through an unexamined life. What I found in them was inspiration for my own life. I think a lot about Laurie Colwin's encouragement to allow myself to fail. Ella Baker's insistence on treating every person with serious attention, Agnes Varda's joyful embrace of discards and leftovers. I am roused by cookbooks, by Elizabeth David's hopeful wit and Edna Lewis's quiet subversion. I am thrilled and disquieted by Octavia Butler's understanding of the human problem, and confronted by Alice B. Toklas's quiet, steely determination to turn meals into art. I am swept along by Maya Angelou's joyfully expansive hope, and I am challenged each day by Hannah Arendt's commitment to friendships, not just as a comfort, but as a flinty rock on which to sharpen herself and challenge the powerful. In each woman, I see grace breaking through, enabling them to face an often frightening world and give courage to their readers, their audiences, their communities. I see something I want to be and learn, and I see something that can, in turn, teach us about the tremendous and life-changing power of eating and drinking and living. So, now, if you're willing, I'd love for you to join them around my table. We have martinis and tongue-tingling mineral water, and some nice cheese and pickled vegetables, and a big loaf of fresh bread and lovely soft butter. Or, if that's not your style, picture whatever you like on this table. You're part of this now. It's our feast, together. Let's make a community. Let's make a world. Chapter 1. Edna Lewis. Rewriting the Story. In my earliest days in New York City, I unwittingly tailed one of the greatest food writers of the 20th century, but I had no idea. Every weekend, I went to the Green Market in Union Square, armed with a tote bag and a sense of adventure. Farmers and artisans from upstate regions and New Jersey drove into the city with flats of eggs, bottles of honey, loaves of bread, crates of beets and potatoes and chard, and, on a couple lucky weekends every spring, ramps. You could buy apples and apple cider, manchego and smoked sausage, a hunk of beef or a leg of lamb, a duck egg, a pound of coffee roasted a few days ago, thick, tangy yogurt, a giant fennel bulb with waving fronds, a wedge of raspberry banana bread to munch on while you shop. Bring cash. The Union Square Green Market is positioned more or less at the center of Lower Manhattan, and the market tents stretch up the west side of the square from 14th to 16th Street. New York University's main buildings are a stone's throw away. There's a giant Whole Foods market and a Trader Joe's facing the square, which can be handy if you want to pick up things you can't get at the Green Market. But it's delightful to just wander through the market and buy a few things for dinner. You'll never have to brave the lines and crush of the stores, and you get to talk to the growers and makers and vendors. I was excited to buy all of their wares. At the time, it felt like everyone was talking about farm-to-table restaurants, the slow food movement, and eating seasonally. Seemingly every cookbook and new restaurant cited the groundbreaking Berkeley restaurant Chez Panisse and its visionary owner Alice Waters as inspirations. I was cooking in my own kitchen for the first time, and I had made a new friend who had trained as a chef. So, at the farmer's market, I bought whole chickens and root vegetables and cheese, and she made dinner for a few of us. It was a revelation. What we didn't know at the time was that the culinary trail we were hiking had been blazed by Edna Lewis. I was a couple decades too late to run into her smiling but imposing figure in that same Green Market. By the time I got to the city, she was living out her later years in Atlanta. I wouldn't have known who she was at the time anyhow. Despite her status as one of the century's most important and influential chefs, a revolutionary who refused to be confined to the worlds that were available to black women in the culinary arts, lots of people have never heard of her. She won major awards and published highly acclaimed books before passing away in 2006. But you're much more likely to have heard of some of her white contemporaries and acolytes, Julia Child, for instance, or Alice Waters, than Lewis herself. In a 2017 episode of Top Chef, the competing cooks were asked to make a dish that paid homage to Lewis. A number of the professional chefs had no idea who she was, and after the episode aired, her cookbook saw a spike in sales. The audience hadn't known either. But during her lifetime, the culinary world and the vendors at Union Square Green Market knew her. In 1988, when she was already in her 70s, an extraordinary age to work in the demanding world of a professional kitchen, Lewis was lured back to New York City, where she had lived previously for many years, to cook at the venerable Brooklyn restaurant Gage and Tollner. She worked there only a few years, but it was a notable moment in the storied institution's history. Lewis worked in Brooklyn but lived in Manhattan, and so, like many chefs, she would go to the Union Square Green Market to buy ingredients for the restaurant's menu. At a 2013 New School panel on Lewis's legacy, her book editor, the legendary Judith Jones, said that when Lewis walked around the Green Market, the sellers would call out to her, coaxing her to check out their wares, and she would offer help to anyone who asked how an item might best be prepared. But her real interest was the freshest, finest, most flavorful food. "She'd walk 50 blocks for a peach," Jones said with a chuckle. That fresh, juicy peach surely evoked memories for Lewis. She was born in 1916 to a family that, like many black families in America, lived with painfully recent memories of life during slavery. Her grandfather was one of 3 freed African-American men who, with their families, established a community in Virginia they dubbed Freetown. While enslaved, her grandmother had been a bricklayer. Lewis's grandparents couldn't read or write. Teaching an enslaved person to do so was illegal. But in Freetown, they opened their home to a teacher so a school could be established. Lewis grew up in a large family, situated in a community in which the goals were self-sufficiency, caring for the land, and cooperating with your neighbors. They raised all kinds of animals, fished in the streams, grew crops, and only bought a few necessities from the store. The years moved according to the rhythm and order of the seasons and the feasts that celebrated them. Harvests, holidays, homecomings, changes in the weather, it all meant new things to cook and preserve and butcher, and most importantly, eat. Memories of cooking at the elbows of her relatives stuck with Lewis, as did those of gathering to eat the fruits of their labor, along with the emotions that went with them. The excitement of butchering pigs in the fall, then blowing their bladders up like balloons with straws and hanging them to dry out for use as Christmas decorations in upcoming weeks. The joy of a good hearty breakfast before a harvest, or butchering or preserving day, the adults adding just a little bourbon to their coffee to fortify them for the work to come. The happiness of seeing far-flung relatives come home for feasts. The bone-weary gladness that comes with a long day spent in the kitchen or the fields, knowing that the fruits of your labor are yours and no one else's. These were the memories that lodged themselves in Lewis's brain. In 1928, when Edna Lewis was 12, her father passed away. Money was already tight, and it got tighter when the Depression began. Lewis didn't finish high school, and when she was 16, she moved to Washington, D.C., and then, eventually, to New York City. She worked as a housekeeper, cooking and cleaning, and later she began working as a seamstress. Soon she was known for her skill, her dresses inspired by African styles, and her uncanny knack for copying couture. But Lewis never got too dazzled by her affluent clients. She married a retired merchant marine cook named Steve Kingston, who was active in the Communist Party. It didn't take her long to recognize that, at the time, The party was taking black people seriously in a way other political parties failed to do. So she joined the Communist Party too. She set type for the party's paper, The Daily Worker, and participated in political demonstrations. Her sense that the capitalist system was not set up for the flourishing of black people and her memory of the more communal lifestyle of Freetown were always on her mind. While she worked as a seamstress and participated in political activity, Lewis also drew a circle of friends to herself who appreciated great cooking, namely her cooking. She frequently held dinner parties in her home, to her guests' great appreciation, cooking the foods and recipes she remembered from home, Southern food by way of Virginia. Outside of the South at the time, Southern-style food was hard to come by, even in New York City. That's a little hard to fathom from our perch in the 21st century, when New York's most exclusive brunch spots now often serve shrimp and grits and fried chicken, and when Southern cookbooks dominate the culinary awards landscape. For many across the United States, Southern food defines American cuisine more than any other region does. But when Lewis started out, Southern food wasn't seen as something refined, certainly not something you'd find on a menu at a fancy restaurant. Chefs at chic city eateries weren't clamoring to serve Southern meals. At the time, many people also considered the South to be backward, prejudiced, poor, and uneducated, not a place with cuisine worthy of exporting. Official policies regarding segregation in the region, a product of racism in political, governmental, and cultural systems, certainly contributed to the perception. European cuisine was what you aspired to. Julia Child was introducing home cooks to French dishes, not American food. The American South has always been more than just what other people think of it, of course, and many of those who contributed to that perception, who considered the South to be backward, were participating in systems that perpetuated de facto segregation elsewhere, including in northern cities like New York, where racial discrimination in eateries was still commonplace until the 1960s. Still, roaming Southerners in New York longed for the food of their home kitchens, and it wasn't easy to come by for a fairly simple reason. Southern food was developed by black people, usually black women, first as enslaved people and then as domestic help. But with widespread illiteracy throughout the early 20th century, the recipes weren't often written down. Instead, they were passed down through oral tradition, or through community cookbooks in which their white employers passed off the recipes of the help as their own. There were very few black people, certainly no black women, heading up kitchens at New York's restaurants. As a Virginian, Lewis learned Southern cooking that was inflected by French influences, thanks to the many Virginians, like Thomas Jefferson, who spent years in France and returned with preferences developed at French tables. Her kind of cooking wasn't easy to find outside of Virginia. Guests at her New York table, though, were fortunate to enjoy what she was making: pies, preserves, blancmange, and certainly fried chicken. One of the guests at Lewis's dinner table was a young man named John Nicholson, an antiques dealer. In 1948, he opened a cafe on the Upper East Side, on East 58th Street, and called it Cafe Nicholson. He asked Lewis to be the chef. It was rare for a woman to be a restaurant chef at the time. It was exceptionally rare for a black woman to take that position. And Lewis wasn't just the chef. She was an equal partner in the business, which was unheard of. Cafe Nicholson was a hit, and became a haunt for famous New Yorkers, many of whom, like Tennessee Williams and William Faulkner, were white Southerners surprised to find Southern cuisine on the Upper East Side. The restaurant's European-style decor mixed with Lewis's cooking attracted literati and glitterati. Marlon Brando, Eleanor Roosevelt, Richard Avedon, Gloria Vanderbilt, Gore Vidal, Jean Renoir, and Marlene Dietrich were all happy customers. They feasted on roasted chickens and chocolate soufflés, all cooked by Lewis from her own recipes. While her simple and elegant menu didn't have biscuits on it, Alabama-raised Truman Capote used to bug Lewis to make him some anyhow. She was the chef and a partner for the cafe until her departure in 1954. It's not entirely clear why she left. Some of it may have had to do with Kingston, her husband, who was thoroughly committed to the communist cause. That's how Nicholson remembered it when, in 2004, he told the New York Times as much. He always used to say, "This restaurant should be for ordinary people on the street. You are catering to capitalists," Nicholson said, adding, "It was such a bore." Lewis and Kingston's move to New Jersey to become pheasant farmers was a short-lived experiment. One night, the whole flock died from a mysterious illness, and that was that. They returned to New York. Back in the city, Lewis opened a restaurant in Harlem that lasted only a year or two. Despite her reputation as the chef at Café Nicholson, new jobs weren't forthcoming, particularly for a black woman. So she took catering gigs and cooked for friends, while also taking a job as a docent at the American Museum of Natural History. And she co-wrote a cookbook with the socialite Evangeline Peterson titled The Edna Lewis Cookbook, which was published in 1972. The recipes in the Edna Lewis cookbook were relatively simple, based on the kinds of food that Lewis served at Café Nicholson. The book is adamant about using fresh, high-quality ingredients. Our aim has been to present a cookbook with recipes for the kind of food that we feel people really eat, and that are not too complicated to prepare. The authors note in the introduction. They exhort the reader to take care with their shopping. The use of fresh ingredients of fine quality is as important to the final results of a recipe as is care in preparation. The recipes are arranged into sections by season and type of meal, luncheons, dinners, buffets, without much commentary other than notes about selecting the right kind of curry or what a perfectly roasted duck looks like. It was a groundbreaking book in its own right, proposing that many Southern-style recipes are as worthy of record as other cuisine in New York City and beyond, and situating those foods in the gourmet landscape. Food figures as prominent as M.F.K. Fisher and James Beard praised it. It was a good book, but some still thought it lacked character and voice. That richness would come with her next book. In the spring of 1972, as the Edna Lewis cookbook was heading for publication, Lewis met Judith Jones. Jones was, and probably still is, the key figure in American cookbook publishing. She was Julia Child's editor. Jones's boss at the time knew Peterson and suggested that Jones meet with Peterson and Lewis to talk about their next project. As they spoke, Jones had an idea. What if Lewis wrote a book that blended her stories of her home in Freetown with recipes based on her memories? Would she be willing to try that? She was. Peterson and Lewis started writing again, but when they returned with pages, Jones was disappointed, feeling as if Lewis's voice had been stripped out. Peterson recognized that her role didn't serve the book or Lewis's voice. She decided to withdraw from the project, and in concert with Jones, Lewis got to work. She'd go to Jones's apartment and tell her stories about the people, the land, the foods, the gatherings, with Jones prodding her for details. Then Lewis would go home and write those stories down on yellow legal pads. Lewis's 12-year-old niece, Nina Williams, helped her by typing up the pages. Published in 1976, The Taste of Country Cooking became a landmark in American food writing. It reads like a memoir as much as a cookbook. Lewis begins by telling the story of Freetown. The name was adopted because the first residents had all been freed from chattel slavery, and they wanted to be known as a town of free people. In loving, lyrical prose, she wrote of the spirit of community, pride and cooperation, the affection that the adults had for the children, and the hard work they all did together. And she recounts in the introduction how something very specific and wonderful stitched together the families of Freetown. Whenever I go back to visit my sisters and brothers, we relive old times, remembering the past. And when we share again in gathering wild strawberries, canning, rendering lard, finding walnuts, picking persimmons, making fruitcake, I realize how much the bond that held us had to do with food.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?